Hello, it's Martin from Wisely Automotive, and in this video we will be looking at our latest brand new purchase, this 2022 Tesla Model Y. In terms of specification, it's pretty much the base Model Y you can get in the UK as of early 2022, with the only optional extra being the midnight silver paint. To give you a bit of a background, this is for now Arthur's own car, and he will run it as a daily for probably a couple of months to see how he likes it, and then we will decide what we do with it next. Given it's not a stock car, it gives us an opportunity to put a bit more mileage on it, so stay tuned for a lot more videos coming soon on this particular car in the very near future. As mentioned, it's the Model Y, but let's look at the VIN just for the record. The 11th digit is a C, denoting that this, in fact, as expected, is a made in China Model Y. Which brings me on to the topic of this video, build quality and the overall fit and finish of the car. Tesla has a bit of a reputation in this area for lagging behind their competitors, but let's see what the state of things is in March 2022. I have to make a couple of disclaimers before I start though. Number one, given it's a car made in the newer Chinese factory compared to the Fremont factory in California, the quality may be slightly different. Tesla basically inherited the US plant, and even back when Toyota was still operating it, there were reports of upgrades needed, especially to the paint shop, so take that for what it is. The Chinese Gigafactory is brand new, built from scratch to Tesla's specification. The second disclaimer is the kind of obvious one, and that is that we have a sample of one. I wish we could have 5 cars here, all with the same build date, side by side to see how they stack up, but this is what we'll have to do for now. But I'm just trying to say that some examples may be slightly better, some slightly worse in different areas. But at the end of the day, this is roughly what you should expect when picking a Model Y in the UK from Tesla in early 2022. Great, enough of the waffling, let's actually get to the topic. Namely, paint quality and the infamous Tesla panel gaps. Paint quality is going to be the easier one. We already had to wipe down the car once because on the way back from Blue Water, obviously this is the UK, so it started raining. But we only used a clean microfiber with a bit of detailer spray on it to get rid of the water spots on the top flat surfaces. I did not quite dare to go further lower down because if you look closely, a lot of sand has accumulated in those areas and I did not want to make the scratches worse. I'm intentionally saying not making things worse because unfortunately the car isn't perfect. Far from it actually. The good news is that pretty much the entire team here at Wisely has covered every single square inch of the panels and we haven't found a single speck of dust underneath the paint. This used to be quite a common issue, especially on the early Model S's and X's from Fremont. So it's great to see that the quality is improving. It's what you would expect, especially at this price point. There may have been one speck of dust on the bonnet or some other kind of imperfection because the delivery team has definitely tried to address it, but they tried a bit too hard and now they left a patch or a hologram just above the Tesla badge. I will try to get as many close-up shots as possible so we can make her mind up on how serious these issues are. But what we can say for this particular one is that we will give the whole car a machine polish and it definitely will not be as visible. Similarly, the car is covered in swirl marks on pretty much every single panel. Again, we suspect this is down to the delivery team either using bad product, the wrong amount of product, dirty microfibers, or just straight up bad technique when preparing these cars. The swirl marks definitely look like something which would be caused by a contaminated microfiber cloth because they are not deep at all. When you run your fingernail over them, it doesn't catch at all, meaning it's literally just in the top layer of the clear coat and a machine polish will take those out. But again, it's one of those things which should not be there, especially on a premium car, and it really detracts from the delivery experience. And yeah, you may say, under these artificial LED lights, every single imperfection is quite a bit more amplified than outdoors. But even when we were picking the car up in a dimly lit supermarket car park, we could already see what we would be dealing with. Anyways, just so you don't have to take my word for it, I will take you around the car, panel by panel, and that will also give us a great opportunity to look at the gaps. To measure them, I will use this panel gap gauge tool. There are multiple ways of going about it. Some people just use a ruler, but this should be the most accurate way of going about it. If you are not familiar, it's a simple plastic wedge which won't scratch the paint, and as it tapers down, there's a scale in millimeters specifying the width at every point in half a millimeter increments. To get the distance between any two panels, I just insert the tool into the gap, making sure it stays perpendicular and read off the value. It's very important to keep it perpendicular, and in fact it's one of the main limitations of using something like this, because if there is any obstruction right underneath the panel, the results could get skewed. The other thing to look at is how flush the panels sit where they meet, and for that I can just use the edge of the tool, and if it rocks over the gap, that means they are not sitting quite level to each other. The paint on the front and the bonnet we've already discussed, so let's move to the gaps. Starting from the top on the near side, we have got about 3.5 millimeters, moving down just under 4 millimeters, where the bumper meets the bonnet just under 4 millimeters, in the middle just under 4 millimeters, and on the off side staying at just under 4, going upwards slightly over 4, and just under 4 again on the very top edge. So far this is really good. The bonnet is quite a complex thing, as in it's a long curved shut line, so having the deviation in the region of under a millimeter is totally acceptable, and if you just look at it with your own eyes without using any tools, it looks absolutely spot on. In terms of flushness, it does sit a bit recessed compared to the front wings. Now, in case of the bonnet, it actually may be a feature to keep the aerodynamic drag as low as possible, because it seems to be consistent across left and right, and I suppose it could make sense. I want to take a closer look at the headlights though. Firstly, yes, this is the same style of headlight as introduced on the facelifted Model 3 with the matrix projectors, but the full adaptiveness where they can cut out different cars from the high beam has not been enabled yet, and we don't know when or even if it will be introduced in the future. In terms of the actual fit and finish, there are no drips on the inside of the headlight units, which sometimes used to be present on some of the earlier cars. And both of them fit into the front wing and the bumper very well. Tesla has in fact made their job quite difficult with choosing this design, because many manufacturers now use bonnets which go over the top edge of the headlight. This makes them look a bit more aggressive and also makes them a bit easier to align, because it essentially completely hides the top of the headlight unit from view. But as I said, all good in this case, and the paint also matches nicely between the metal wing and the plastic bumper. Moving further down the side, because the bumper, unlike the bonnet or the doors, is not meant to be moving, there shouldn't really be any gap between it and the wing, and that is in fact the case, matching nicely all the way across. Any of these pointy bits, like for example right by the headlight, are usually quite difficult to manufacture when we are talking about stamping or casting, and they used to be quite troublesome on, for example, the early Model S's or 3s. But here it's sitting perfectly flush like you would expect. While I'm on that comparison, one of the key design differences between the 3 and the Y is that the Y has these plastic wheel arch trims going all the way down the side as well. The intention being to make it look a bit more rugged, given it's an SUV, even though I'm pretty confident 99% of these will never go off the road. But coincidentally, it should also bring a nice improvement in longevity and reliability. That's because all the Model 3s have this wheel arch edge of the front wing exposed. And the first ones which were delivered in the US did not come with any mud flaps. That meant as the cars were getting used, stone chips were starting to accumulate along the edge, and especially in the lower part here, which could lead to early corrosion. Tesla's way of fixing that was to start fitting the cars with mud flaps, but they are not exactly the best design, because now, yes, they do protect the edge a tiny bit, but they have this flared, flat edge, which proved to be a very good place for water to collect, which would again fuel the corrosion. But these Model Ys, not only do they have the plastic trim as I showed you, but the mud flap design has been reworked as well, and now they are completely flat, so there is no way for the water to pool and cause trouble. And they also extend a bit higher up to further protect the edge of the wheel arch. And even though they may look a bit plasticky, the bottom edge is nice and flexible, so even if you run over a bit speed bump, these will not snap off. Continuing down, let's look at the door alignment. So the leading edge of the driver's door on the top is about 3.5 millimeters, 3.5 further down, and 3.5 all the way at the bottom as well. And sitting nice and flush, so no complaints here. Moving to the trailing edge, this is one of the examples where it's not quite easy to judge the gap because it's not quite possible to insert the tool due to the design of the rear door, but about 3 millimeters on the top, just under 3.5 mil in the middle, and 3 millimeters at the bottom again. Looking at the door handles, these could be inconsistent early on, with them being either too recessed or sticking out too far, but in this case, all 4 of them sit perfectly flush with the rest of the door panel. One other favorite area of discussion are these window surround trims. In this case, maybe if you really looked at it, you could say that they could be slightly improved, but in reality, when approaching the car, they look absolutely spot on. And if I verify with the tool, the top edge sits perfectly flush, but there's about a millimeter of a difference on the side. But as I said, if you are just walking up to the car, it's not something you would ever notice. While I'm here, the functional thing to look at is how the windows sit in the seal and with comparison to the B-pillar, because bad fit and finish here is not only cosmetic, but could cause excessive wind whistling or leaks. But no problems with either the front or rear windows on this example. And bit of the trim around the rear quarter window also looking good, aligned well with the rear door, and the rear door sitting pretty much perfect with the rest of the rear quarter panel. I will try to get the gaps here as well. We've got about 3.5 millimeters on the top, 3.5 in the middle, just under 3.5 at the bottom here. And now keep a close eye here, because as the gap continues, there's a cutout in the plastic trim to make sure that it stays consistent all the way until the bottom edge. And if I verify with the tool, it indeed is at about 3 millimeters. In this light, the swirl marks on the top of the rear door are really standing out. But as I mentioned with the other ones, these are still just in the clear coat and will polish off. With them being at this head, maybe I'm too harsh on the preparation team, and these could have been caused by someone just brushing against the car with a button on their jeans or a handbag or something like that. Luckily, given the car was kept in a car park with relatively tight parking spaces, no dents anywhere on this side. Tesla also applied paint protection film right on the bottom edge of the door as the panel expands, which really used to catch a lot of stone chips. It's nice that they went through the effort, because previously these used to be an option which you could get from the Tesla shop or from any third parties. But while they were at it, they could have applied it properly, because it includes a lot of bubbles underneath, especially along the bottom edge here. So I honestly have no idea how long this is going to last before it starts peeling from the edges, and it's even worse on the other side, I'm afraid. Anyways, let's check out the tailgate now. Very good alignment along the side. Unfortunately, the black trim sits a tiny bit too high, so the gap between it and the tailgate is a bit smaller than the gap further down here with the rear quarter panel, but still perfectly acceptable and definitely will not be rubbing at all, so we don't have to worry about anything like corrosion. If you want the numbers, there is a 3.5 millimeter gap along the top edge, about 2.5 between the decorative trim and the boot lid, and now continuing down, it stays consistent at about 3 millimeters. And remember how I said at the front that the pointy metal bits are difficult to stamp out? Well, we've got a similar shape here, which was a frequent problem in the past, but now manufactured perfectly. The taillight unit is split into essentially 3, with the section in the boot lid, just above the rear bumper, and in the rear quarter panel. All aligned very well though, so perfectly flush across the rear flat bit, and the boot shut line continuing as expected into the side portion. At the first glance you may say that the gap on top of the fixed part is too big and far larger than the cluster in the boot lid, but that's definitely intentional to keep the 3mm clearance like with all the other moving panels to enable the tailgate to open and close safely without rubbing against the plastic. Also, while I'm on the topic of lights, good to point out that none of them have condensation issues. In all fairness, condensation is often overblown. No headlight unit is perfectly sealed from the environment, and a little bit of moisture should not really cause any concern. It only becomes a real problem when the cluster turns into an aquarium, because with that amount of water you are running into the risk of short circuits or mold growing inside. But yeah, as I said, no issues here. There's not much to comment on the rest of the tailgate, other than saying that the alignment is really spot on, and this is how it really should have been from the early days, and Tesla would not have had the bad reputation it has now for build quality. I understand it takes time, but if you want the numbers, just under 4mm, just under 4mm, and the bottom edge about 4mm, 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 just over 4, just over 4, and 4mm again. Just like the bonnet, this is quite a complex shut line, so with the deviation being in the millimeter range, this is perfectly acceptable. If you just look at the car without the tool, it looks absolutely spot on. One interesting design decision is that the tailgate extends all the way down into the bumper. In terms of practicality, it makes sense because it means that the loading edge is lower, so it should be more comfortable to lift heavy objects into the boot of the car. But it also means that if you get rear-ended or reverse into something, not only do you damage the bumper, but also the tailgate itself, which is probably quite an expensive part. With the one side covered, I'm happy to report that when we inspected the other side, it's exactly the same thing, but let me run through it so you can see for yourself. The gap between the tailgate arm and the roof is about 3.5mm. On this side, the gap is a bit more consistent between the trim, the quarter panel and the tailgate. So about 3.5mm all the way down, continuing into the charge port on this side as expected. Lights still nice and flush with the bigger gap to allow for the tailgate to open and close. A perfect line between the quarter panel and the rear bumper, forming a sharp, crisp edge on the top and then continuing smoother, just like intended in the design. Plastic wheel arch trims, nice and consistent. Unfortunately, there's a lot more of the little hairline scratches on the top parts of the doors and the rear panels here, but let me check with my fingernail, and yeah, all of them will definitely buff out. There are also these two little rough spots on the paint, and it seems like it's the glue residue which was not properly removed. When the factory protective film was removed before the handover, we can easily address that with a tiny bit of white spirit and a polish all over it. And if you took the car through an automated car wash, it would also most likely take it off. It's just a bit of a shame because it could have been done by the preparation team in a minute or two. Moving forward, door gap, 3.5mm, just over 3.5, 3.5, 3.5, 4mm. Visually, no complaints. This is the side with the even worse PPF, with significant specks of dust and bubbling underneath. Door handles all right, windows sitting flush just like on the other side. The decorative trims on the doors also fitting flush, and I would say even better than on the right side. Front door gap, just over 3mm, 3.5, 3.5, just about 3mm, and nicely in line with the rear door. An area which I did not mention on the right side is right around here. So we've got the A-pillar meeting, the front wing and the front door with all the decorative trim pieces as well. It used to go really badly for early Teslas around here because as the front wing was mounted, it is then secured from the door side, and as that was tightened, the panel shifted slightly to the right. The reason why we think this is because Always on the left side, the panel used to be slightly too much to the right, and the right panel was then also offset too far to the right. It's now perfect on this example though, and it's quite difficult to illustrate, but if I grab a piece of paper, you can see that it slides through the entire gap without any issues or catching on anything, so you don't have to worry about rust forming because the wing would be rubbing against the body or the A-pillar. And in fact, I think that's the exterior covered. The only other thing to check is the roof. All Model Ys get the glass roof. There were supposed incidents where the glass was not mounted properly in the past. Obviously, we cannot really test how well the glue is holding, but in terms of alignment, the leading edge is absolutely spot on, the sides are spot on, and the trailing edge is spot on as well. So we don't really see any issues. And the curvature nicely matches the profile, so no concerns up here. Let's move inside. In the cockpit, neither of us could really spot any issues. The entire dashboard is essentially mounted in the car as a single unit which is assembled outside, which is the way most manufacturers do it now, and it means it's a bit easier to work on and get the fit and finish just right before moving the entire assembly into the car. If you look very closely, you may think that there is a bit of an inconsistency with where the windscreen meets the base of the dashboard, but that's in fact intentional because that's where the two slots for the windscreen demisters are. A bit closer to where you actually handle things, the screen is mounted on completely solid, not a single squeak coming from that. Both stalks on the steering column working as well, so are the wireless phone chargers in the center console. Speaking of that, let's see. Yeah, there's no squeaking or movement from side to side whatsoever, with perfectly straight stitching and seams, and the cover door dampened as expected. No wiggle room in the steering wheel or squeaking at all either. I know many people can say that the interior looks cheap, but let's assess that in a bit more detail. Yes, it looks minimal, which is intentional, and you may not like it. There's nothing I can do about that. That's the reason why there is so much choice on the market for you to pick what you like. In terms of the materials, not only is it on par with the competition now, but in some areas maybe actually even a tiny bit better. So let me show you what I mean. The top of the dashboard is nice and soft. We've got the matte open pore wood, which again may be to your liking or not. The bottom of the dashboard, which is often cheaped out on because it's not something you would normally touch, is still padded and soft touch. The central console is wrapped in the vegan leather with the microfiber or Alcantara surface for the wireless phone chargers. If we open the center storage, that is nicely lined with felt, so even if you have a lot of things in, they should not rattle. The screen is, I'm pretty sure, mounted on an aluminium stand, and that's one of the reasons why it's so solid. The steering wheel scroll wheels now feature machined metal inserts, so the bits you touch feel very premium. And if we look at the door card, the top of the door is nice and padded, if you like resting your elbow on there with the window down. The open pore wood again with the satin decorative trims which visually continue from the dashboard into the door. Soft touch Alcantara insert, a soft touch door handle with a padded armrest. And yes, slightly harder plastic lower down, but still none of that horrible beige stuff. And importantly, nice thick carpet lining the door pocket, so if you have something like a metal flask in there, it should not cause too much noise. Well, I'm also here, regardless of whether you like the minimalist design or not. Hopefully we all agree on one thing which every other manufacturer should follow. All of the decorative trim pieces are either this satin silver, or for example the window switches, and the buttons to open the doors are all matte black. So no horrible scratches on them, no fingerprints after you use them a single time. This is how it should be done. I don't know a single person who wants gloss black touch points anywhere in their car. Please, BMW, Mercedes, anyone else, copy this. The front seats are nice and simple, and I'm pretty sure they are identical to the Model 3 seats. They are just mounted on little risers to give you the higher seating position, but comfort-wise, we absolutely love them. They are very soft and squishy, almost like sitting in an armchair, but they have just enough side support, so it's still easy to get in and out of. They will keep you sufficiently snug if you start pushing the car a little bit harder on a nice twisty road. Full electric adjustment, a standard of course, linked to your profile in the screen. It's a very similar story in the rear, not much really to comment on. All the seams and the edges are perfect, stitching on point, parts fitting as they should. The materials in the rear doors are the same as the front doors, so the top soft and premium with the Alcantara insert, matte black window controls, padded armrests and the felt lined door pockets. The only shame is that this was not cleaned properly. For some reason there is a little stain on the middle seat. Even just by looking at it now, when I rub my finger over it, this will come off with a simple wet wipe. That's even more infuriating that it has not been done before the collection. There was also a little stain just above the air conditioning exhausts in the back, but that has already rubbed off without any problems. And while I'm sitting here, I'm really thinking that we will make a dedicated video on the interior space, because very quickly, with the car being higher, the seat could move a bit higher from the floor as well. So we've got a good amount of thigh support. And because the front seats are on risers as well, that gives you lots of foot space under the front seat, so you can really stretch out and travel in comfort. As you may have read, there is no parcel shelf in the boot. I wouldn't say it's a particular concern because the windows have a tint on them, so potential thieves can't really see what's in the boot. It could slightly affect the noise coming from the rear wheel arches, so we will definitely test it out and report on how we get on. Otherwise, the rest of the boot is lined with carpet, and there's a little roadside kit under the false floor. The only thing to point out on this other side is that, well, first, there are now double glazed windows in the rear as well, and they do have a factory tint. Finish on this side, very, very good. Stitching on point. No dents in the vegan leather on the seats, but there was a massive footmark on the side sill. Probably someone trying to clean the roof and not wiping that off afterwards. Should have been done, but we will just hoover that and it will come straight out. Also, this gives me a good view at the trims surrounding the glass roof. This used to be a problem on some of the early Teslas, but as the rest of the interior, this one is absolutely perfect. For example, the top of the B-pillar meets the headliner perfectly, and the rear, the middle and the front headliner pieces meet perfectly between each other and to the glass roof as well. The front passenger seat is almost identical to the driver's one. In terms of fit and finish, the stitching no different and also electrically adjustable, but there is no lumbar support adjustment. Now, if I sit up straight, I can still feel that there is a little lumbar pillow, so you will be comfortable, but just know that in the effort to probably cut cost, and based on monitoring tens of thousands of these vehicles, Tesla has decided to drop the feature. It can be a bit infuriating at this price point, but honestly, hand on heart, how many times have you, your family or your friends jumped into someone else's car and adjusted the lumbar support? Probably close to zero. While I'm looking into the light through the windscreen, I can also see there is a lot of smudges on the windscreen alongside the A-pillar trim. It's just dirt and will definitely be wiped off, but just a little oversight from the preparation team. And there's also more glue residue on the passenger side from the exterior, probably from a delivery sticker or something along those lines. In case you encounter anything similar, let me show you. A tiny bit of white spirit on a paper towel will do the trick and take all the residue off. The last couple of things which used to be problematic in the past was the glove box alignment with the rest of the dash, but in this example it's absolutely perfect. Then the little mounts holding the sun visors in place sometimes would not be clipped into the headliner properly, but these ones are in and solid. And third, the door seals would sometimes not be installed properly, so either bunched up or not overlapping the plastic trims all the way, but we have checked all of them and they are absolutely perfect. The last thing to do is to go for a short test drive, because Arthur has mentioned that there is a bit of a rattle coming from the back of the car, so let's see whether I will manage to replicate it. We've got a bumpy stretch of road ahead, so hopefully it should become apparent here. Okay, most of the rattling I hear is coming from the camera mount, so I will take it off, because I think there is a very faint rattle coming from the back on very bad roads and on cobblestones, but I'm not sure where it's coming from and whether it's the tailgate or the rear seats. So let's have a listen. Yeah. It could possibly be one of the headrests. Yeah, I think that has to be it. So I'm back from my little test drive, and there definitely is a rattle somewhere in the back of the car. Neither of us have managed to quite pinpoint the location, but we haven't really focused on it that much. If we manage to sort it out on our own, or Tesla lets us know what the problem is, I will make sure to leave a note saying what the problem was and how it got solved. Otherwise, the entire team can very confidently say that Tesla has come a very long way in terms of build quality. So if you're in the market for a Model Y but you are still quite undecided and you are leaning towards the competitors just because of build quality, something like the Audi Q4, maybe on the smaller end the Mercedes EQA and so on, my personal recommendation would be is that if you like everything about the car, the build quality is no longer an issue in 2022 and hopefully it will only get better from now on. As I said in the beginning of the video, a lot more content on this car coming soon, including where we take some panels off and look under the bonnet. So make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.